The humidity had remained constant for 6 days. Sergeant John Harker noted it without speaking of it. The moisture in the air coated every exposed weapon component, settled beneath armor straps, and collected inside the lungs with every breath. Catachan was unforgiving even to those born upon it. The jungle measured weakness through patience rather than speed. Men who feared sudden death often survived longer than those who underestimated slow exhaustion. The deployment had already begun before the team reached the designated insertion point. Rick von Strugger had developed a fever during transit aboard the low-orbit corvette Merciless Lantern. Bren Harbor had spent most of the journey disassembling and reassembling a plasma coil assembly under dim red maintenance lighting to prevent mechanical drift from orbital humidity. Sarah Cull had slept only 4 hours in 3 standard days, spending the remaining time recalibrating Auspex dampeners against electromagnetic interference originating from the southern continental mass below. No one complained. Complaints on Catachan were treated the same way as bleeding wounds. Both attracted predators. The assigned objective had been delivered through encrypted Astra Militarum channels nearly 12 days earlier. At first glance, the mission appeared routine by local standards. A suspected heretic outpost had emerged deep within the southern jungle territories beyond established Imperial settlements. Long-range patrols had disappeared near the region over the course of 4 months. Vox silence eventually escalated concern levels within the local command hierarchy after several reconnaissance aircraft failed to return. The pattern itself disturbed Imperial command more than the disappearances. Aircraft vanished without debris. Ground teams disappeared without remains. No distress calls were recorded. No survivors returned. Such precision suggested organization rather than wildlife. That alone justified escalation. Harker had reviewed the collected intelligence personally inside a reinforced command bunker beneath Fort Talassa. The reports indicated traces of Dark Mechanicum activity, supported by corrupted guard auxiliaries operating within dense fungal canopies west of the Black Mire Basin. Energy fluctuations detected through orbital augers suggested the construction of plasma reactive infrastructure beneath the jungle floor itself. That changed the situation entirely. Dark Mechanicum operations on Catachan represented a catastrophic strategic threat. The planet itself was already among the deadliest worlds controlled by the Imperium. Introducing warp-corrupted machinery into its ecosystem risked destabilizing entire continental zones. Imperial tacticians feared the consequences if corrupted machine systems successfully adapted to native predatory fauna and environmental conditions. Entire hive worlds had fallen for less. Harker understood the implications immediately. Destroy the outpost before expansion became irreversible. No negotiations. No retrieval priority. No prisoner requirements. Complete elimination. The mission authority came directly through regional command under emergency authorization protocols. That detail alone confirmed the severity of the threat. Standard regimental deployments had been bypassed entirely in favor of a smaller veteran infiltration force. That was why Harker had selected the team personally. Rick von Strugger moved first through most combat formations due to his physical build and environmental instincts. Born within the Iron Root territories of western Catachan, von Strugger possessed unusual endurance, even among veteran jungle fighters. He stood nearly 2 meters tall, with extensive scar tissue along both forearms from razorwing encounters during adolescence. His preferred weapon remained a heavily modified Mark II Ripper shotgun fitted with reinforced recoil dampeners and acid-resistant plating. Bren Harbour served as the unit's technical specialist and demolitions expert. Harbour lacked the physical intimidation common among veteran Catachans, but compensated through obsessive precision. His combat gear carried nearly 40 kilograms of explosives, breaching tools, field repair kits, and power stabilization equipment. Harbour's experience against traitor mechanized formations on Boros Prime had earned him multiple commendations, though he rarely spoke about the campaign itself. Cianhail River acted as long-range reconnaissance and environmental analysis support. Unlike most jungle fighters, River maintained a methodical and patient demeanor during operations. She possessed extensive expertise regarding native Catachan, flora, toxins, and subterranean ecosystem behavior. Several commanders considered her among the most reliable trackers within the regiment. Her observations often prevented casualties before threats fully emerged. Flak served as heavy support. No one within the regiment remembered Flak's original birth name anymore. The nickname remained more appropriate. He carried a belt-fed heavy bolter modified beyond standard Munitorum approval. Ammunition belts crossed his torso beneath camouflaged cloaks, fashioned from scaled jungle predators hunted years earlier. Flak rarely initiated conversation. His battlefield role remained brutally straightforward. When stealth collapsed, Flak created enough firepower to keep everyone else alive. Sarah Cull operated communications and suppression countermeasures. She specialized in signal interception and electromagnetic masking. Cull had spent years assisting Imperial operations against rebel cells, utilizing stolen Mechanicus technology across frontier systems. Her familiarity with corrupted machine code patterns made her particularly valuable during operations involving Heertex. Together, they represented one of the most experienced independent combat teams within the Catachan regiments stationed on-world. Even then, command added further reinforcement: 2 Adeptus Astartes. That fact alone altered the tone of the operation before deployment officially began. The first was Saul Alonius. The second was Sergeant Varux. Both belonged to the Raptors chapter, itself descended from the Raven Guard lineage. Unlike more ceremonial Space Marine forces, the Raptors emphasized stealth warfare, reconnaissance, precision strikes, and battlefield pragmatism. Their combat doctrine aligned unusually well with veteran Catachan operational philosophy. Harker respected that immediately. The first meeting occurred inside Fort Talas's lower armory sectors, roughly 19 hours before deployment. Neither Astartes attempted unnecessary introductions. Saul Alonius removed his helmet only briefly during the briefing. His face appeared gaunt and severe beneath pale lighting. Numerous combat scars crossed his scalp and jawline. His eyes remained fixed on mission projections throughout the briefing, without interruption. Sergeant Varux spoke even less. Both Astartes wore subdued green and gray power armor, coated with environmental camouflage compounds rather than ceremonial heraldry. Their weapons reflected similar practicality: suppressed bolter configurations, compact ammunition loads, combat blades optimized for confined engagements. no banners, no purity parchment excess, no theatricality, professional killers. That alone earned silent approvals from several Catachans present during the briefing. The mission itself required orbital insertion roughly 200 kilometers north of the suspected outpost. From there, the team would advance through dense jungle terrain undetected before infiltrating the facility itself. Primary objectives focused on locating and destroying several stability constructs believed responsible for maintaining subterranean plasma reactors beneath the site. Failure to destroy those constructs risked partial reactor stabilization. Partial stabilization risked long-term expansion. Long-term expansion risked permanent Dark Mechanicum entrenchment within southern Catachan territories. That outcome could not be permitted. The greatest concern, however, involved the jungle itself. Even corrupted machine cults struggled to survive long upon Catachan without adaptation. Intelligence reports suggested the heretics had begun modifying environmental systems to repel local predators and toxic growth patterns. Entire sections of jungle reportedly displayed signs of unnatural silence. No insect movement, no avian activity, no predator migration. The absence of life on Catachan was more alarming than its presence. Cian Hale River had noted that detail repeatedly during mission preparation. Something beneath the jungle was changing local behavior patterns. That meant the ecosystem had noticed the intrusion, and Catachan always responded eventually. Hours before deployment, Harker sat alone near the transport bay, overlooking the lower landing fields beneath Fort Talassa. Rain hammered the ferrocrete platforms continuously, while maintenance crews loaded supply containers into the waiting Valkyrie transport. He watched fuel vapors rise through floodlights as thunder rolled across distant jungle ridges beyond the fortress perimeter. He had survived enough campaigns to recognize familiar patterns. Certain operations carried an atmosphere difficult to explain to inexperienced soldiers. Not fear, not certainty of death. Something quieter. A sense that events had already begun moving before the first shot was fired. The Dark Mechanicum believed it could survive within the jungles of Catachan. That alone revealed either arrogance or ignorance. Neither tended to survive long on the planet. The final mission assembly occurred approximately 4 hours before atmospheric insertion. By then, all non-essential personnel had been removed from the lower command sectors beneath Fort Talassa. The operation no longer resembled a standard Astra Militarum deployment. It had become compartmentalized, isolated through multiple encrypted authorization layers, with information restricted even among senior command staff. The fewer individuals aware of the mission parameters, the lower the probability of compromised intelligence. Sergeant John Harker entered briefing chamber 16, carrying a folded jungle cloak, still wet from rainfall outside the fortress perimeter. Moisture dripped from its lower edges onto the steel flooring as he approached the central hololithic display table. The chamber itself remained dimly lit, except for tactical projections suspended above the reinforced surface. Topographic scans of southern Catachan rotated slowly within the air, overlaid with atmospheric density readings, known predator migration routes, thermal signatures, and corrupted electromagnetic interference patterns spreading outward from the target zone. Every member of the infiltration team had already arrived. Rick von Strugger sat closest to the southern wall, cleaning carbon buildup from the breech assembly of his Ripper shotgun, using a sharpened steel pick. His equipment occupied nearly half the bench beside him. Extra ammunition belts, fragmentation grenades, anti-armor charges, spare filtration canisters, and sealed toxin suppressants had all been organized in perfect order. Von Strugger prepared for combat with the same mentality others reserved for survival shelters. Nothing remained unaccounted for. Bren Harbor stood near the central projector, reviewing structural schematics transmitted from orbital scans. Unlike the others, Harbor wore magnification lenses over his right eye while examining projected infrastructure layouts. Several sections of the facility blueprint had been highlighted in red, where energy fluctuations suggested reactor stabilization nodes beneath the structure. Harbor continuously adjusted calculations regarding explosive yield requirements and estimated structural collapse patterns. Sian Hale River remained near the rear entrance, organizing environmental records stored within thin, waterproof data slates. She had spent the previous 14 hours analyzing regional ecosystem behavior surrounding the outpost's suspected location. That analysis concerned her more than the enemy itself. Something within the surrounding jungle had begun changing migration routes. Native predator populations avoided the region entirely. That alone contradicted natural behavior patterns. Even apex predators rarely abandoned territory without reason. Flack occupied the far corner of the chamber beside stacked ammunition crates awaiting final transport. He inspected the rotating feed assembly of his heavy bolter with slow mechanical patience. The weapon itself had undergone repeated modifications across nearly 15 years of combat service. Reinforced cooling systems lined the upper receiver housing. Additional recoil compensators had been welded directly into the frame. A standard Imperial guardsman would have struggled to carry it effectively. Flack treated it like a hunting rifle. Sarah Cull monitored Vox encryption frequencies from a portable communications terminal connected directly into the Fortress tactical network. Multiple static bursts or interrupted transmission integrity every few minutes. The interference originated from the target region, despite the enormous distance involved. Cull did not like that. The corruption patterns resembled partially organic machine code distortion. Dark Mechanicum systems frequently utilized warp reactive transmission architecture impossible to fully predict through conventional Imperial communications protocols. Standard signal encryption often degraded near prolonged Heretech activity. Sarah Cull's responsibility involved maintaining operational coordination despite those distortions once the infiltration began. The two Raptors arrived last. Saul Alonius entered first without escort, his armored boots producing dull metallic impacts against the chamber floor. The green-gray camouflage coating across his power armor absorbed most reflected light within the room. Unlike ceremonial Adeptus Astartes plate displayed during public military gatherings, his armor showed extensive operational wear. Deep scoring marks crossed the left shoulder guard. Several sections along the chest plating had been repaired using reinforced bonding compound rather than replaced entirely. Practical repairs. Field repairs. The armor belonged to an active hunter rather than a symbolic warrior. Cyril Varrox followed several seconds later, carrying a long precision pattern bolter across his chest. A suppressor assembly, nearly half a meter in length, extended beyond the weapon's barrel housing. The weapon configuration itself reflected Raven Guard tactical doctrine perfectly. kill targets before they identify your presence. Maintain momentum through uncertainty. Avoid prolonged engagements whenever possible. Neither Astartes removed their helmets initially. Colonel Basha addressed the room only after the chamber doors sealed. He was among the few senior officers on Catachan authorized to oversee joint operations involving Adeptus Astartes deployments. Age had visibly hardened him over decades of jungle warfare. Thick scar tissue ran beneath his left eye, down toward the jawline, where a spine-maw attack had nearly removed half his face years earlier. The target has now been confirmed, Basha stated. The hololithic projection shifted immediately. A three-dimensional image of the research outpost emerged above the table. The structure had not been built traditionally. It had grown. Dark metallic framework protruded directly through jungle terrain, like exposed skeletal growth beneath diseased flesh. Corrupted manufactorum towers extended upward through massive tree canopies, supported by reactor conduits pulsing faint red beneath layers of organic contamination. Several sections appeared partially fused with surrounding rock formations through unknown industrial processes. Even viewing the structure produced discomfort. Nothing about its construction aligned with natural geometry. We estimate 400 traitor auxiliary personnel operating within the outer perimeter, Basha continued. Possibly more below ground level. Primary threat assessment remains Dark Mechanicum personnel supported by automated defense systems. The projection zoomed inward. Multiple underground sectors appeared beneath the facility itself. Reactor chambers, manufacturing corridors, data crypts, weapons storage sectors, containment vaults. Most disturbing of all were the stability constructs. 8 massive pylons surrounded the central reactor complex beneath the jungle floor. Energy readings pulsed continuously across each structure. Harber narrowed his gaze immediately upon seeing them. Plasma stabilization architecture, Harber muttered quietly. Colonel Basha nodded. Modified technology. Unknown origin. We believe the constructs are preventing catastrophic thermal overload while excavation continues deeper beneath the basin. Excavation for what? Serakal asked. Basha hesitated briefly. That remains unclear. The room stayed silent. Unclear objectives involving the Dark Mechanicum generally implied something extremely dangerous. Harker studied the projection carefully. The outpost itself mattered less than the location beneath it. Catachan possessed ancient geological formations buried beneath thousands of kilometers of jungle terrain. Some regions predated Imperial records entirely. Explorator fleets had attempted deep core surveys centuries earlier before abandoning several expeditions after catastrophic losses. The planet concealed things beneath its surface. Most intelligent men stopped digging once they realized that. Apparently, the heretics had not. The mission is straightforward, Colonel Basha continued. Insertion through northern canopy sectors. Advance south undetected. Destroy the 8 stabilization constructs. Eliminate reactor integrity. Withdraw before full structural collapse. Expected resistance? Saul Alonius finally asked. His voice emerged low and controlled through helmet vox modulation. Significant, Basha answered. The enemy understands the strategic importance of the facility. Orbital scans confirm defensive hardpoints positioned across all major access routes. Automated turrets, heavy weapon nests, corrupted servitor patrols. Any Chaos Astartes presence? Cyril Varix asked. Unconfirmed. That answer carried weight. Unconfirmed meant possible. The room understood that immediately. Colonel Basha shifted the projection again towards surrounding jungle regions. This, he said calmly, may become equally problematic. The environmental display revealed vast sections of altered ecosystem behavior surrounding the outpost perimeter. Migration routes curved unnaturally around the facility. Predator nesting zones had collapsed entirely within several kilometers of the region. Even more concerning were the heat signatures. Massive life forms had begun gathering beyond the perimeter itself, not fleeing, waiting. Sian Hale River crossed her arms while studying the projections. "The jungle's reacting," she said quietly. No one disagreed. Catachan functioned less like an ecosystem and more like a planetary predator network. Every organism competed constantly against every other organism. Introduce sufficient disruption into that balance, and the environment responded violently. Dark Mechanicum machinery polluted everything it touched. The jungle would not tolerate that forever. "We believe the enemy has deployed atmospheric repellent systems to keep local fauna away," Basha explained. "Temporary success only. Environmental pressure continues increasing." "How long before containment fails?" Harker asked. "Unknown." Again, not a reassuring answer. The briefing transitioned toward equipment allocation afterward. The infiltration force would deploy with minimal support to avoid detection. No armored vehicles, no artillery coordination, no orbital bombardment authorization unless total mission failure occurred. Extraction depended entirely upon reaching a designated landing zone, approximately 14 kilometers east of the target after demolition completion. That meant the team would need to survive both the facility and the jungle afterward. Supply calculations reflected that reality. Every member carried concentrated nutrient packs sufficient for 9 standard days. Water purification systems had been modified specifically for Catachan toxin filtration. Bren Harbor received additional demolition charges and portable melter cutters. Sarah Cull carried 2 redundant Vox systems protected inside insulated anti-interference housings. Flak received extra ammunition. A great deal of extra ammunition. The Raptors required little. Saul Alonius requested updated patrol routes and internal security rotations. Cyril Varix focused primarily upon underground corridor schematics and probable ambush points within confined sectors. Their professionalism impressed several Catachans despite themselves. The Astartes wasted no time asserting superiority or ceremonial authority. They treated the mission like professionals. Nothing more. That mattered. As the briefing concluded, Colonel Basha issued the final operational warning. "If the reactor reaches instability before withdrawal," he said carefully, "the resulting detonation may ignite approximately 40 square kilometers of surrounding jungle." Nobody reacted outwardly. On Catachan, that was not merely environmental devastation. That was suicide territory. The planet's ecosystem became exponentially more dangerous during large-scale firestorms. Displaced predators, airborne toxins, territorial swarms, and subterranean organisms all emerged simultaneously during major environmental disruption. Destroying the facility represented only half the challenge. Surviving what happened afterward represented the other half. Harker looked once more toward the rotating projection of the corrupted outpost beneath the jungle canopy. The Dark Mechanicum had entered one of the most hostile environments in the Imperium. and somehow believed machinery alone could tame it. That arrogance would eventually become fatal. The only uncertainty remaining involved how many would die before the jungle finished correcting the mistake. The Valkyrie entered the southern atmospheric corridor during the final hours before dawn. Heavy storm systems covered most of the continent beneath them, concealing movement from both orbital observation and surface detection. Rain struck the transport hull continuously, as turbulence shook the interior compartment hard enough to rattle ammunition crates against their restraints. Inside the troop bay, nobody spoke. The red deployment lights overhead cast long shadows across reinforced armor plating and stacked equipment containers. Every member of the infiltration team remained focused on final equipment checks, while the aircraft descended lower into Catachan's southern jungle territories. John Harker sat nearest the forward hatch, with both hands resting against the grip assembly of his customized heavy bolter. The weapon's matte finish had been coated in additional anti-moisture compounds hours before launch, though Harker understood such preparations only delayed inevitable corrosion on Catachan. Every firearm eventually degraded if exposed long enough. The jungle consumed machinery with the same efficiency it consumed flesh. Across from him, Rick von Strugger tightened the straps securing his secondary ammunition packs, while occasionally glancing toward the flickering tactical display mounted along the troop bay wall. His expression remained calm, though years of combat alongside Harker made subtle tension easier to recognize. Von Strugger always grew quieter before operations involving enclosed structures. He preferred open jungle warfare. Buildings restricted movement reduced survival options. Bren Harbor occupied the rear section of the compartment, surrounded by demolition equipment packed into reinforced carrying frames. Several shaped melter charges rested beside his boots, along with portable detonator assemblies wrapped in waterproof insulation sheets. Harbor inspected every explosive component repeatedly throughout the descent, despite already verifying them multiple times before departure. The humidity bothered him. Moisture damaged precision timing systems. Even minor calibration failures during reactor demolition could kill everyone involved. Sheehan Hale River remained closest to the aircraft's port-side observation slit, studying the jungle beneath intermittent lightning flashes. Even from altitude, the southern territories appeared hostile, beyond normal environmental conditions. Massive tree canopies stretched endlessly across the landscape, like dark ocean waves beneath storm clouds. Some individual trees rose hundreds of meters into the atmosphere, their trunks thick enough to conceal entire armored vehicles behind root structures. Movement occasionally appeared beneath the canopy. Large movement, predatory movement. Sarah Cull monitored transmission integrity through a compact Vox unit strapped against her chest armor. Static interference worsened steadily the deeper they traveled south. Multiple encrypted Imperial channels already suffered distortion patterns inconsistent with normal atmospheric disruption. Dark Mechanicum interference. Artificial? Purposeful? Cull adjusted several signal stabilizers before finally muttering, "They are actively masking regional frequencies." "Can you cut through it?" Harker asked. "Short range, maybe. Long-range communications unreliable already." That complicated extraction planning immediately. The Raptors stood near the transport ramp in complete silence. Saul Alonius remained motionless, despite severe turbulence shaking the aircraft. His armored figure appeared almost mechanical beneath the dim red lighting. Beside him, Cyril Varouks inspected ammunition magazines with slow, deliberate precision before securing them back into reinforced magnetic clamps along his armor plating. The two Astartes carried themselves differently from most Space Marines Harker had encountered years earlier during joint operations. Less ceremonial, less visible, more focused. Hunters rather than warriors seeking recognition. The pilot's voice suddenly crackled through the troop compartment speakers. Approaching drop coordinates in 2 minutes. The aircraft immediately descended lower. Rain intensified against the hull. Lightning illuminated the jungle briefly beneath them before darkness returned again. The insertion point had been selected carefully after orbital reconnaissance identified a relatively stable section of elevated terrain, approximately 200 kilometers north of the target facility. Stable on Catachan remained a relative term. The surrounding region still contained multiple apex predator nesting zones, toxic fungal colonies, and dense carnivorous vegetation capable of immobilizing armored personnel within seconds. Compared to the target zone itself, however, it represented safer terrain. The Valkyrie slowed abruptly. Internal lights shifted from red to green. Move! The rear deployment ramp lowered partially, immediately flooding the compartment with humid jungle air and deafening rainfall. Thick mist rolled inside, while the roar of engines merged with distant thunder overhead. Below them, the jungle canopy appeared impossibly dense. Towering black vegetation swayed violently beneath the storm, while massive root formations twisted across elevated ridges like exposed skeletal structures. One by one, the team descended rapidly along reinforced grav cables toward the jungle floor. Harker reached ground level first. Mud swallowed nearly half his boots immediately upon landing. The smell hit next. Wet vegetation, rotting biomass, toxic spores, animal musk, decay. Catachan always smelled alive. Even the soil felt hostile beneath movement. The team regrouped quickly beneath the massive root network surrounding the landing zone, while the Valkyrie immediately ascended back into storm cover above. Within seconds, the aircraft vanished entirely behind rainfall and darkness. Then silence returned. Not true silence, jungle silence. A living background of distant insect vibrations, dripping moisture, shifting foliage, low animal calls, and unseen movement somewhere beyond visual range. Every Catachan within the team instinctively paused to listen. The jungle communicated constantly. The inexperienced failed to notice. Veterans listened first before moving. Sea and Hail River crouched near exposed soil while examining fresh tracks partially hidden beneath rainfall runoff. Her expression tightened slightly. Predators moved through here recently, she said quietly. What kind? Sarah Cull asked. River studied the impressions more carefully. Several kinds. That answer alone carried enough concern. The team advanced south within minutes. Movement through Catachan required patience above all else. Speed often proved fatal. Harker maintained point position alongside Saul Alonius, while River periodically moved ahead to inspect terrain hazards before the rest followed. Visibility rarely extended beyond 20 meters. Massive jungle growth blocked nearly all natural light beneath the canopy, despite approaching dawn overhead. Thick vines hung from towering branches like suspended cables, while enormous fungal growths spread across fallen trees in glowing patches of pale blue and sickly green. Insects larger than a human hand scattered across trunks as the team passed. Several times they halted entirely, not because enemies appeared, because the jungle itself moved nearby. At one point, distant branches cracked somewhere east of their route, with enough force to suggest enormous mass shifting through dense vegetation. Flack slowly rotated the barrel assembly of his heavy bolter toward the sound, while everyone remained motionless. Nothing emerged. The sound stopped several minutes later. Nobody pursued it. Experienced Catachans understood an important rule. If something large in the jungle lost interest in you, encourage that decision. Hours passed gradually as the team pushed deeper southward through increasingly unstable terrain. Rainfall eventually weakened near midday, replaced by suffocating humidity beneath the canopy. Sweat collected beneath armor plating almost immediately, while biting insects swarmed exposed skin whenever movement slowed. Brent Harbor nearly lost his footing, crossing a partially submerged root bridge, spanning black swamp water approximately 4 meters below. River caught him before he fell. "Do not touch the water," she warned calmly. Harbor looked downward. Small ripples crossed the swamp surface, despite no visible rainfall reaching beneath the canopy. Something moved below the waterline. Long shapes, multiple shapes. Harbor continued walking without another word. By late afternoon, the first signs of Dark Mechanicum presence finally appeared. The jungle began dying. At first, the changes seemed subtle. Fewer insects, less sound, reduced animal movement. Then came the vegetation itself. Entire sections of jungle growth appeared discolored and partially metallic near the edges. Vines fused together through unnatural black mineral deposits. Tree bark carried strange geometric scarring patterns burned directly into the surface. Thick, oily residue coated exposed roots along several kilometers of terrain. Sarah Cull crouched beside one contaminated section while scanning it with a handheld auspex. "Radiation traces," she muttered. "Low level. Artificial." Saul Alonius studied the surrounding terrain silently before finally speaking. "The corruption spreads outward." He was correct. The jungle had begun fighting back. Several contaminated trees already showed signs of aggressive overgrowth, crushing mechanical conduit lines extending beneath the soil. Thorned vines wrapped tightly around exposed piping, while fungal colonies spread across damaged metal surfaces with unnatural speed. The ecosystem itself was adapting, violently. As darkness approached again, the team established temporary concealment within a dense rock formation overlooking a shallow valley, approximately 40 kilometers north of the target. That was when they saw the outpost for the first time. Even at extreme distance, the structure polluted the horizon. Tall industrial towers rose above the jungle canopy, emitting dull crimson light through storm clouds overhead. Massive smokestacks expelled black vapor into the atmosphere, while flickering reactor energy illuminated surrounding terrain intermittently beneath the rain. The facility looked diseased against the natural landscape. Wrong, like rust spreading across living tissue. Through magnoculars, Harker observed movement along elevated perimeter walls, traitor guardsmen patrols, automated turret rotations, searchlight sweeps cutting across the jungle edge. And beneath all of it, deep below the structure itself, faint red pulses emerged through the earth in slow, rhythmic intervals. Reactor activity? The stability constructs were active. Bren Harbor lowered his magnoculars slowly. "That's bigger than the scans showed." Nobody argued. The outpost had expanded significantly beyond initial projections, which meant one thing. The Dark Mechanicum had progressed further than Imperial command realized. And somewhere beneath that corrupted fortress, buried inside the jungles of Catachan, something important enough to justify such expansion was waiting underground. Night concealed much of the outpost from direct observation, but it did nothing to reduce its presence. From the elevated rock formation overlooking the valley, the facility dominated the surrounding jungle through constant industrial vibration alone. The sound carried across kilometers of terrain beneath the rainfall. Deep mechanical pulses echoed beneath the earth in rhythmic intervals, accompanied by the grinding movement of subterranean machinery operating somewhere below the visible structures. John Harker remained awake throughout the night cycle, observing the valley through magnocular lenses, while the others rotated through controlled rest periods. Sleep near an active enemy position on Catachan never reached true unconsciousness. Every soldier present understood the jungle could produce threats independent of the enemy at any moment. The terrain itself already complicated infiltration planning. The outpost occupied a relatively stable plateau carved directly into the jungle basin. Dense tree coverage had been removed in concentric layers surrounding the facility to create overlapping defensive sightlines. The cleared perimeter extended approximately 700 meters outward before natural jungle density resumed. Floodlights mounted atop rusted tower structures illuminated portions of the outer clearing intermittently through heavy rainfall. That clearing represented a killing zone. No experienced infiltration force would attempt a frontal approach through open terrain covered by automated weapons and elevated firing positions. The Dark Mechanicum understood basic defensive doctrine. Unfortunately for them, Catachan rarely respected military engineering. The plateau itself suffered constant environmental degradation. Several sections along the western perimeter had partially collapsed into surrounding swamp regions, where unsteadable soil consumed support structures over time. Thick jungle growth continuously pushed inward from every direction, despite industrial clearing efforts. Massive root systems already cracked sections of ferrocrete wall foundations near the southern defensive line. The jungle reclaimed territory aggressively. Given enough time, it always succeeded. At approximately 0400 local time, Hale River completed a detailed environmental survey using magnocular sweeps combined with motion tracking through thermal optics. She assembled the team beneath a concealed overhang, while rainwater poured steadily down nearby rock surfaces. The eastern perimeter's strongest, River explained quietly, while projecting terrain scans from a portable slate. Heavy fortification coverage, overlapping turret arcs, automated Auspex towers. Her finger shifted southward. North side's cleaner terrain but exposed. They cut away most of the upper canopy there. What about underground access? Bren Harbor asked. River zoomed further inward toward the western valley sectors. That's where things get unstable. The projection revealed large sections of swamp terrain bordering the outpost's western perimeter. Unlike the cleared northern approaches, the western region remained partially consumed by thick vegetation and flooded terrain unsuitable for heavy industrial development, which meant weaker visibility. Weaker visibility created opportunity. The swamp limits heavy patrol movement, River continued. Ground pressure readings show reduced traffic there compared to the northern and eastern sectors. Because the terrain's dangerous? Sarah Cull asked. Because it's Catachan. That answer covered multiple possibilities. The swamp itself likely contained dozens of lethal environmental threats, independent of enemy presence. Carnivorous leeches, venom pools, buried sink roots, acidic fungal colonies, submerged predators, still preferable to fortified gun emplacements. Saul Alonius studied the terrain map without speaking for several moments. The western approach also places us closer to the reactor sectors, he finally stated. He was correct. Most of the visible industrial towers concentrated toward the eastern plateau sections, while thermal readings suggested heavier underground infrastructure beneath the western side. That meant fewer personnel stationed nearby due to unstable terrain conditions. The enemy trusted the jungle to help defend that sector. A dangerous assumption, because veteran Catachans understood how to move through it. John Harker finalized the infiltration route shortly afterward. The team would descend southwest through the lower basin ridges before circling toward the western perimeter under dense canopy coverage. River would maintain forward reconnaissance, while Saul Alonius and Cyril Varax handled perimeter elimination if silent kills became necessary. Bren Harbor would preserve demolition charges until direct contact with the stability constructs. No unnecessary engagements, no prolonged firefights. The deeper they advanced without detection, the higher the probability of successful extraction later. Movement resumed before dawn. The jungle terrain surrounding the basin worsened steadily the closer they approached the facility. Rainwater overflowed through massive root trenches, creating waist-deep mud channels beneath dense vegetation. Toxic spores drifted through humid air, thick enough to partially obscure visibility despite short engagement distances. Several times, the team halted while River identified environmental hazards ahead. One entire stretch of swamp terrain contained nearly invisible vine growth capable of injecting paralytic toxins through skin contact. Another sector concealed carnivorous fungal pods beneath shallow water surfaces that reacted violently to body heat. The Dark Mechanicum had entered an ecosystem actively attempting to kill everything inside it. The Catachans simply understood the rules better. By midday, the group reached the outer edge of the western basin, approximately 4 kilometers from the facility perimeter. From there, the environmental damage became impossible to ignore. The jungle was changing. Large sections of vegetation surrounding the outpost displayed signs of contamination, spreading outward through soil and root systems. Tree bark carried black metallic growths protruding from beneath organic surfaces. Thick fungal masses pulsed faintly with internal red light near exposed industrial runoff channels. Even the insects had changed. Sarah Cull crushed one against her armor sleeve after it landed near her shoulder. Black fluid leaked from the carcass. Tiny metal fragments mixed within the organic tissue. Machine contamination, Bren Harbor muttered while examining it briefly. Can it spread? Flack asked. Harbor nodded once. Eventually. That silence afterward carried weight. If the corruption adapted fully to Catachan's ecosystem, containment might become impossible. The mission objective suddenly felt far more urgent. Hours later, River signaled an immediate halt near the edge of a shallow ravine overlooking the western perimeter. The outpost now stood less than a kilometer away. From this distance, the scale of the facility became fully visible. Massive industrial towers extended high above the jungle canopy, connected through elevated metal walkways and suspended reactor conduits. Steam vents expelled superheated vapor continuously from beneath the plateau, while dim red emergency lighting flickered across armored wall sections. Traitor guardsmen patrolled the perimeter in rotating formations supported by corrupted servitor units, carrying heavy weapon systems grafted directly into mutilated flesh. Automated gun towers rotated slowly across the clearing beyond the wall line. The smell reached them next. Burned chemicals, hot metal, rotting biological waste, warp contamination. The facility smelled artificial against the living jungle around it. Wrong in every possible way. Cyril Varrox observed patrol rotations through his rifle scope before quietly speaking. Discipline is inconsistent. Harker noticed it too. The traitor formations lacked cohesion. Some patrols maintained proper spacing and observation coverage, while others wandered carelessly through assigned routes. Several guardsmen displayed obvious physical corruption beneath their armor. Distorted movement patterns, swollen limbs, mechanical implants fused improperly into exposed tissue. The Dark Mechanicum treated human auxiliaries like expendable components. That reduced overall combat efficiency. Useful information. Saul Alonius focused instead on defensive positioning. Their strongest coverage remains directed outward, he said, meaning they feared attack from beyond the jungle, not infiltration already inside it. That gave the team an advantage. River identified the first viable breach route shortly afterward. Near the southwestern perimeter wall, a large section of swamp terrain had partially collapsed several support pylons, supporting outer electrical conduit lines. Maintenance activity nearby appeared minimal due to unstable ground conditions. More importantly, thick overgrown vegetation concealed most visibility from elevated watchtowers. Perfect infiltration terrain. Dangerous terrain. Catachan terrain. The team advanced slowly toward the breach position, while remaining beneath dense route coverage. Rainfall intensified again during movement, masking sound beneath constant environmental noise. Every step required careful placement across unstable swamp surfaces hidden beneath shallow water and tangled vegetation. At one point, Flack nearly stepped onto a partially submerged predator nest concealed beneath mud. River stopped him immediately. Several small reptilian creatures, no longer than human forearms, burst from the water moments later before disappearing again beneath nearby roots. Their teeth alone resembled sharpened needles. Even the smallest predators on Catachan remained lethal. By late afternoon, they reached final staging positions overlooking the compromised perimeter sector. The enemy remained unaware. From concealment beneath massive root formations, Harker studied the western wall carefully through magnocular optics. Rust spread visibly across support braces, where swamp moisture had weakened structural integrity over time. Electrical conduits flickered intermittently along damaged segments, while several automated sensors appeared inactive entirely. The jungle had already begun dismantling the outpost. The infiltration route itself narrowed between flooded terrain and unstable ferrocrete support pillars, leading toward a partially exposed maintenance corridor entering beneath the outer wall. One route inward, one route outward. The kind of path that became deadly if discovered mid-operation. Sarah Cull monitored communications frequencies quietly nearby. Signal interference just increased again, she whispered. How close are we to reactor sectors? Harker asked. Very. That explained it. The stability constructs beneath the facility generated electromagnetic distortion, powerful enough to affect local terrain conditions. Bren Harbor confirmed the same through handheld Auspex scans moments later. Reactor output's unstable already, Harbor warned quietly. Whatever they're powering down there, it's straining containment. Can they stabilize it? Sarah asked. Harbor looked toward the distant industrial towers beyond the rain. Not for long. That realization settled across the team almost immediately. The outpost was not secure. It was deteriorating. And somewhere beneath the jungle floor below that corrupted facility, the Dark Mechanicum was running out of time. The infiltration began shortly after nightfall, beneath worsening storm conditions. Heavy rainfall reduced visibility across the western perimeter, while thunder masked minor movement sounds beneath the jungle canopy. John Harker considered the timing acceptable. Catachan storms disrupted discipline, even among experienced soldiers. Exhaustion lowered awareness. Routine replaced caution. That was when veteran infiltration teams moved. The group advanced single file through partially submerged terrain toward the compromised maintenance corridor beneath the western wall. Cian Hale River maintained point position several meters ahead, moving carefully between flooded root systems while monitoring for pressure-sensitive traps or environmental hazards concealed beneath the mud. The closer they approached the outpost, the more unnatural the environment became. The jungle itself looked diseased. Vegetation surrounding the perimeter had grown thick and twisted around industrial structures as though attempting to strangle them. Large fungal masses pulsed faintly with internal heat beneath the rain, while oily runoff contaminated shallow swamp water with shimmering black residue. Even the insects sounded wrong. Low mechanical vibrations mixed with natural movement patterns across the darkness. The maintenance breach itself emerged beneath a collapsed support pylon, partially consumed by swamp erosion. Rusted metal plating hung outward from the exposed corridor entrance, where weakened structural braces had finally failed beneath environmental pressure months earlier. Nobody spoke. Saul Alonius entered first. The Raptors preferred confined infiltration work due to enhanced reaction speed and low-light combat capability. Harker followed directly behind, while the others secured the rear approach. Inside, the corridor air changed immediately. Hot, dry, artificial. Industrial heat replaced jungle humidity within seconds. Narrow maintenance tunnels stretched ahead, beneath dim emergency lighting, coated in layers of condensation and black residue. Pipes lined both walls, carrying superheated coolant deeper underground, while electrical systems flickered intermittently overhead. The smell intensified further underground. Burned metal, chemicals, rotting organic tissue, blood. Something else beneath all of it. Something corrupted. Sarah Cull quietly adjusted her Vox dampener while scanning surrounding frequencies. "They're transmitting machine prayers," she whispered. The static bursts filtering through her receiver sounded distorted beyond human speech patterns. Fragments of Binharic code mixed with corrupted chanting echoed faintly through the tunnels beneath constant mechanical vibration. Dark Mechanicum personnel. Clones. The team advanced slowly through the maintenance sector, while Bren Harbor periodically marked structural weak points along the corridor walls for potential emergency demolition later if extraction routes collapsed. The tunnels themselves showed signs of rapid expansion. Fresh welding scars covered older infrastructure sections. New power conduits had been forced directly through existing walls without proper reinforcement. Several areas displayed heat damage severe enough to partially melt surrounding metal supports. The facility was growing faster than its systems could support. That matched Harbour's earlier assessment regarding reactor instability. Approximately 300 meters inside the perimeter, River suddenly raised a closed fist. Immediate halt. Everyone froze. Ahead, faint voices emerged through the tunnel intersection beyond the next corner. Traitor guardsmen. Harker moved forward carefully beside Saul Alonius until both reached visual range near the corridor bend. Two enemy soldiers stood near a sealed bulkhead checkpoint beneath flickering lumen strips. At first glance, they resembled standard Imperial guardsmen equipment patterns. Flak armor, laser guns, utility harnesses, environmental cloaks. Then the details became visible. Corruption. One soldier's lower jaw had been replaced entirely with crude mechanical augments that clicked continuously while he spoke. Exposed wiring protruded through torn flesh along his neck. The other displayed severe tissue swelling across both arms where metallic growths fused directly into skin beneath damaged armor plating. Neither moved normally. Jerking muscle spasms interrupted natural posture. Their eyes appeared clouded and unfocused. Dark Mechanicum corruption rarely preserved humanity cleanly. The heretics modified people like machinery, efficient until failure. Saul Alonius glanced once toward Harker. Silent confirmation. The Raptors moved first. The Space Marine crossed the corridor intersection without sound, despite his armored mass. One hand seized the nearest traitor by the throat, while the combat blade in his other hand penetrated beneath the jawline into the brainstem. Instant death. The second guard barely reacted before Cyril Varix emerged from behind the tunnel support column and drove a suppressed bolt round through the target's skull. The impact reduced most of the upper cranium into vaporized debris against the wall behind him. The entire engagement lasted less than 3 seconds. No alarm triggered. The bodies were dragged immediately into a maintenance recess, while Sarah Cull disabled the checkpoint Auspex relay connected to the bulkhead station. Harker examined the dead guardsman briefly. The corruption had progressed further than expected. Small metallic growths spread beneath the skin around the eye sockets. Thin cables connected portions of the spinal column directly into crude implanted processors embedded along the ribs. Not voluntary augmentation. Forced integration. The Dark Mechanicum converted humans into biological equipment. Further advancement deeper into the facility revealed increasingly disturbing evidence of the same process. Entire corridor sectors contained restrained labor servitors fused into machinery interfaces through invasive surgical modification. Some remained partially conscious. Others twitched involuntarily while connected to industrial systems through exposed neural implants. Nobody attempted conversation with them. Mercy was impossible at this stage. The reactor levels lay further below. The team descended through maintenance stairwells, spiraling deeper beneath the facility, while industrial noise intensified steadily around them. Massive machines operated somewhere beyond the walls, producing vibrations strong enough to shake dust and condensation loose from overhead pipework. Then they encountered the first organized resistance. River detected movement first. Multiple heat signatures approaching through the adjacent corridor network. Too many for silent elimination. The team immediately established firing positions behind industrial support braces, lining the lower maintenance junction, while Harker counted approaching footsteps through the metal flooring vibrations. 8 personnel, possibly more behind them. The enemy appeared moments later, rounding the corridor bend. These were not ordinary traitor guardsmen. Heavy industrial armor covered most of their bodies beneath layered welding aprons reinforced with metal plating. Several carried modified las carbines integrated directly into mechanical arm assemblies. Others wielded cutting torches burning hot enough to melt through armored bulkheads. Dark Mechanicum labor troops, combat engineers. Their bodies showed extensive augmentation bordering on mutilation. One individual possessed no visible lower face beneath breathing apparatus, welded directly into the skull. Another dragged an enlarged mechanical limb, ending in hydraulic claws stained black with oil and dried blood. The lid figure noticed movement immediately. He attempted to raise a weapon. Flack inspected the remaining ammunition belts stacked across his harness before speaking next. 600 rounds left. Normally substantial. Inside a collapsing, Dark Mechanicum fortress filled with unknown resistance. Less reassuring. The Raptors required no assessment. Saul Alonius stood near the corridor entrance, watching darkness beyond the red emergency lighting, while Cyril Varux monitored rear approaches through his scope. Neither Astartes displayed visible fatigue despite continuous movement through hostile terrain for nearly 2 days. Their calmness helped stabilize the others, not through speeches, through professionalism. No wasted motion, no panic, only forward momentum. Harker studied the partial facility map projected from Sarah Cull's data slate, while alarms continued echoing across distant corridors. The reactor complex remained roughly 700 meters below their current position through a series of industrial freight tunnels leading into the excavation sectors beneath the plateau. Unfortunately, the most direct route was now sealed. Enemy lockdown protocols had activated blast doors throughout the lower levels. Brenhaber pointed toward an alternate route crossing through secondary maintenance sectors bordering the reactor chambers. "We can bypass the main security network here," he explained. Less defended. River narrowed her eyes at the projection. "And structurally unstable." Harbour nodded. "Very. The tunnels beneath the western sectors had suffered extensive damage from constant reactor strain and environmental pressure pushing upward from surrounding jungle terrain. Several support sections already appeared partially collapsed, according to internal scans. Still preferable to fighting directly through hardened security corridors. The decision was immediate. Move fast, reach the constructs, destroy them before the facility fully mobilized. The team advanced again through the lower industrial sectors beneath the outpost, while the atmosphere worsened steadily with depth. Heat increased near the reactor levels until condensation dripped continuously from overhead pipe systems. Thick chemical vapor filled portions of the tunnels hard enough to sting exposed skin and blur visibility beneath emergency lighting. The deeper they moved, the less human the facility became. Mechanical growth spread across entire walls in places like invasive metallic fungus. Pulsing cables protruded directly through ferrocrete flooring, while corrupted machine prayers echoed faintly through hidden vox emitters, embedded inside the structure itself. The Dark Mechanicum had not simply built beneath the jungle. They had infected it. Then came the first real evidence that the situation inside the outpost was deteriorating beyond enemy control. The team entered a partially collapsed maintenance junction, roughly 400 meters from the reactor sectors, and discovered bodies. Not Imperial, not theirs. Dark Mechanicum personnel. Several lay crushed beneath fallen support beams, while others appeared torn apart violently by something massive. One corpse remained partially fused into an industrial control panel through exposed mechanical implants still sparking weakly beneath layers of blood and coolant fluid. Cian Hale River crouched beside deep gouge marks running across the corridor wall. "These weren't caused by explosions," she said quietly. Saul Alonius studied the damage briefly. "Predatory strikes." Flack looked toward the darkness further down the tunnel. The jungle got inside. No one dismissed the possibility. Catachan's ecosystem exploited weakness relentlessly. If reactor instability or structural damage had opened underground access routes into the lower sectors, native predators would eventually follow the heat and movement. The jungle did not care who occupied the facility, only that something vulnerable existed within it. Movement resumed carefully afterward. Enemy resistance grew increasingly fragmented the closer they approached the reactor levels. Some corridor sectors remained entirely abandoned, while others contained isolated groups of corrupted guardsmen operating without coordination. The first major engagement occurred near a cargo transfer station overlooking the excavation descent. Approximately 20 traitor guardsmen held defensive positions around a reinforced checkpoint, supported by automated turret systems mounted along the ceiling. Unlike earlier enemies, these soldiers appeared more disciplined. Former Imperial veterans. Their armor retained remnants of original regimental insignias beneath layers of corruption and crude mechanical augmentation. Some still wore officer markings partially obscured by oil stains and ritual carvings etched directly into the metal. They opened fire immediately. Lasbolts flooded the corridor, hard enough to vaporize portions of the wall behind the team's position. Flack answered with overwhelming force. Heavy bolter fire tore apart the automated turrets first, before ripping through the defensive barricades protecting the traitor line. Explosive rounds detonated bodies and machinery alike across the transfer station, while Saul Alonius advanced through the center, firing controlled bursts into enemy firing positions. Cyril Varax eliminated elevated targets methodically through precision shots into exposed helmets and weapon joints. The corridor became smoke and blood within seconds. Rick von Strugger pushed left again, using maintenance containers as cover before breaching directly into the enemy flank. His Ripper shotgun reduced one corrupted officer into fragmented armor and bone at point-blank range. Another enemy attempted retreat toward the lower descent elevators. Sarah Cull shot him through the spine before he reached the control station. The engagement lasted less than a minute. When it ended, the transfer station burned beneath flickering red emergency lights, while ammunition casings rolled across the floor through streams of coolant and blood. Still no casualties. But resources continued shrinking. Flack dropped another depleted ammunition drum beside the wall. 400 rounds. Bren Harbor checked the remaining demolition packs again. All primary charges intact. Good. That mattered more than ammunition now. Because finally, for the first time since infiltration began, they could see the reactor sectors themselves. The descent chamber beyond the transfer station opened downward into a massive underground excavation complex extending deep beneath the jungle floor. Towering industrial platforms surrounded a central reactor pit, glowing crimson beneath layers of steam and mechanical haze. And around that pit stood the stability constructs. 8 massive pylons arranged in a circular pattern around the reactor core. Each construct pulsed with unstable energy, strong enough to distort the air around it. Thick cables extended downward into the reactor chamber itself, while machine priests moved frantically between control stations along elevated platforms. The scale exceeded every prior estimate. The reactor complex resembled an entire subterranean city. And beneath all of it, something enormous moved below the excavation floor. The vibrations confirmed it. Slow impacts, heavy impacts, like something striking upward against the earth itself. Serikal stared toward the reactor pit uneasily. "That's not reactor feedback." "No," Saul Alonius answered quietly. "It isn't." Harker studied the entire chamber carefully, while enemy personnel scrambled below, unaware the infiltration team had reached the upper descent station. The objective now stood directly in front of them. Destroy the constructs, collapse the reactor, escape before the entire facility died around them. Simple in theory, almost certainly catastrophic in execution. Then the first distant scream echoed upward from somewhere deeper inside the excavation sectors below. Not human, mechanical, followed immediately by gunfire erupting somewhere beneath the reactor platforms. The jungle had found its way underground. The reactor chamber descended nearly 300 meters beneath the jungle floor. From the upper transfer station, John Harker could finally observe the true scale of the excavation complex surrounding the stability constructs. Massive industrial support columns extended upward into darkness beyond visible range, while elevated walkways crisscrossed above the central reactor pit in layered networks of rusted metal and exposed conduit lines. The heat alone became oppressive. Superheated steam vented continuously from fractured pipe systems throughout the chamber. Thick chemical vapor drifted across the lower platforms beneath flashing emergency lumens, while the reactor core pulsed with unstable crimson light from deep below the excavation floor. Everything inside the chamber looked strained beyond operational limits. Support braces bent under pressure. Electrical systems overloaded intermittently. Entire sections of walkway plating sagged from thermal expansion. The Dark Mechanicum had pushed the facility too far too quickly. Bren Harbor crouched beside the upper railing while studying the reactor layout through magnocular optics. "They're feeding directly into the core," he muttered. The stability constructs surrounding the pit each connected downward through enormous energy transfer conduits thicker than armored vehicles. Every pulse traveling through them caused visible distortion across the surrounding air. Reactor energy fluctuations rolled outward through the chamber in rhythmic waves strong enough to shake loose dust and debris from overhead structures. Whatever the heretics had uncovered beneath the jungle required extraordinary containment or extraordinary suppression. Below, dozens of Dark Mechanicum personnel continued operating across the platforms, despite the growing instability surrounding them. Corrupted engineers moved between control terminals alongside heavily armed traitor guardsmen, securing the primary approach routes into the reactor sectors. None had noticed the infiltration team yet. That would not last long. Harker studied the 8 constructs carefully. Destroying all 8 simultaneously remained impossible with their remaining explosives. Harker had already confirmed the team lacked sufficient yield for synchronized demolition across the entire chamber, which meant precision mattered. "Can we trigger chain destabilization?" Harker asked quietly. Harker narrowed his gaze while recalculating the reactor geometry. A few tense seconds passed. Then he nodded. "Yes." Everyone focused immediately. "The constructs are compensating for each other," Harker explained, while projecting a simplified energy pattern across his slate. "Take out the right sequence, and the remaining pylons overload automatically." "How many?" Serikal asked. 3. That changed everything. 3 primary demolitions instead of 8 drastically improved their survival odds. Still dangerous. Still likely fatal if miscalculated, but achievable. Harker highlighted 3 specific constructs positioned around the reactor pit. These are load-bearing stabilizers. Destroy them simultaneously, and the reactor feedback loop collapses inward. "What happens then?" Flack asked. Harker looked toward the pulsing reactor core below. "The entire facility dies." No one needed additional clarification. The chamber trembled again beneath another deep impact from somewhere below the excavation floor. Closer now. The movement beneath the earth had grown stronger since entering the reactor sectors. Large debris fragments occasionally fell from the upper support structures during the impacts, while several lower maintenance platforms had already collapsed entirely near the western side of the pit. The jungle was no longer outside the facility. Something from beneath Catachan itself had entered the lower excavation zones. Gunfire echoed again somewhere below. Closer this time. Short bursts. Panicked firing patterns. Then screaming. Multiple voices. Cut off abruptly. Saul Alonius remained focused on the mission. "We move now," he said calmly. He was correct. Every additional minute increased the probability of complete structural failure before extraction became possible. Harker immediately divided the assault assignments. Saul Alonius and Seril Varax would descend first and eliminate the western platform security positions guarding the first construct. Rick von Strugger and Flack would suppress the northern defensive line overlooking the second pylon. Harker, Sarah Cull, Bren Harbor, and Sion Hale River would breach toward the eastern support platform carrying the final demolition charges. No prolonged engagements. Plant charges. Withdraw immediately. The operation began less than 2 minutes later. The Raptors moved first. Saul Alonius descended the maintenance ladder toward the western platforms with terrifying efficiency despite his massive armored frame. Seril Varax followed above him, providing elevated overwatch through suppressed precision fire. The first traitor sentry died without sound. Then the second. By the time nearby guardsmen recognized movement across the western catwalks, Alonius had already entered close quarters range. Bolter fire erupted across the chamber. The Space Marine advanced directly through the western security line, while controlled bursts from his weapon shattered armored bodies apart against reactor machinery. One corrupted servitor attempted interception with integrated plasma weaponry before Seril Varax detonated its upper torso through a perfectly placed shot into the reactor assembly mounted within its chest cavity. Simultaneously, Flack opened fire from the upper transfer station. The heavy bolter thundered across the excavation chamber, hard enough to drown out portions of the reactor noise itself. Mass reactive rounds tore through northern defensive barricades, while Rick von Strugger advanced aggressively beneath the covering fire. Traitor guardsmen scattered across the platforms attempting return fire. Most died before securing stable positions. The confined industrial layout worked against them. The infiltration force moved too fast. Harker led the Eastern Breach team downward through maintenance gantries suspended above the reactor pit itself. Heat blasted upward from beneath the chamber, hard enough to distort visibility, while emergency sirens screamed continuously through overloaded Vox systems. Enemy resistance intensified immediately. 3 Dark Mechanicum combat servitors emerged from an adjoining corridor near the eastern construct, carrying integrated heavy weapon systems fused directly into their bodies. Sarah Cull fired first. Her last rounds struck the lead servitor across the optical sensors, but failed to slow it. The machine continued advancing, while rotary cannon barrels spun toward the team's position. River dropped prone instantly. Her long-last round penetrated the exposed cranial junction beneath the servitor's armored collar. The machine collapsed mid-step. The remaining 2 opened fire. Industrial walkway plating exploded apart beneath heavy caliber impacts, while sparks and steam erupted across the gantry. Harker pushed forward through the barrage before driving concentrated bolter fire directly into the second servitor's torso assembly. The impacts ruptured its reactor housing. The explosion hurled burning debris across the platform. The third servitor nearly reached Bren Harbor before Saul Alonius appeared from the adjacent platform and tore the machine apart through point-blank bolter fire. The Raptors had already secured the western construct. Charges planted. Varrox voxed calmly. Harker signaled acknowledgement. Harbor immediately moved toward the eastern pylon, while Sarah Cull established temporary signal interference across nearby corridor access points to delay reinforcements. Up close, the stability construct looked even worse. The pylon pulsed like a diseased organ beneath layers of corrupted machinery and exposed plasma conduits. Mechanical tendrils spread outward from its base into the surrounding platform, while black liquid seeped continuously from ruptured seams across its surface. Dark Mechanicum runes covered portions of the metal casing. The construct itself appeared partially alive. Harbour ignored it completely. He secured the melter charges with practiced efficiency across the primary coolant junctions before connecting synchronized detonator lines into his control unit. "Eastern charge armed," he announced. Then the chamber shook violently. Not from the reactor. From below. A massive impact slammed upward beneath the excavation floor, hard enough to crack several lower support columns surrounding the reactor pit. Entire sections of catwalk collapsed into the abyss below, while traitor personnel screamed across distant platforms. Then something emerged. A massive segmented limb burst upward through the lower excavation wall beneath the western sectors. Organic, armored, covered in mud, root matter, and layers of thick predatory spines. The creature tore directly through industrial machinery, while corrupted personnel scattered in panic around it. Catachan devil, an enormous one, likely drawn underground through excavation tunnels opened by the heretics. The beast attacked indiscriminately. One Dark Mechanicum priest disappeared entirely beneath its jaws before the creature smashed through another support platform, using enough force to collapse several surrounding walkways into the reactor pit below. The jungle had fully entered the facility now, and it was angry. Harker immediately recognized the opportunity. Enemy coordination collapsed almost instantly as the creature rampaged through the lower sectors. Traitor guardsmen abandoned defensive positions while reactor personnel attempted desperate evacuation deeper into the complex. "Final construct," Harker ordered. The northern pylon remained. Flak and von Strugger had reached it already, but enemy resistance there remained strongest due to overlapping heavy weapon coverage across the platform approach. Harker moved immediately alongside Saul Alonius toward the northern sectors, while River and Cull covered harbor during final detonator synchronization. The northern platform had become a battlefield. Heavy las fire crossed the chamber continuously, while traitor reinforcements attempted to hold the final construct at all costs. Flak fired from partial cover behind collapsed machinery, while von Strugger advanced between industrial supports, carrying the final melter charge pack manually after one of the remote detonators malfunctioned during the firefight. An enemy autocannon emplacement pinned them both behind a ruptured coolant line. Saul Alonius solved the problem instantly. The Space Marine crossed nearly 30 meters of open catwalk under direct fire before slamming into the emplacement position bodily. The corrupted gun crew barely reacted before he crushed one against the railing and executed the other through point-blank bolter fire. Harker reached von Strugger seconds later. "You good?" Von Strugger reloaded his shotgun calmly despite las fire striking nearby support beams. "Still breathing." Together they pushed toward the final pylon, while Flak suppressed enemy firing lanes across the upper platforms. The last charge locked into place moments later. Bren Harbor's voice crackled through the Vox network. All three constructs synchronized. The reactor chamber continued collapsing around them. The Catachan Devil tore through another platform somewhere below, while reactor overload warnings screamed through every speaker system in the complex. Harker looked once toward the unstable core beneath the excavation pit. The mission objective stood completed. Now they had to survive long enough to escape what came next. Bren Harbor triggered the synchronized detonation sequence exactly 43 seconds after the final charge armed. The first construct exploded beneath the western platform. White plasma fire erupted through the pylon housing hard enough to vaporize nearby machinery instantly. Superheated energy surged upward across the reactor chamber, while warning sirens shifted into catastrophic overload patterns throughout the facility. The second detonation followed less than 2 seconds later. The eastern construct ruptured violently, tearing apart its containment shell and collapsing an entire section of suspended walkway into the reactor pit below. Burning debris rained through the chamber, while emergency bulkheads attempted automatic closure around sectors already too damaged to seal. Then the northern construct failed. The entire reactor complex screamed, not metaphorically. The sound resembled metal tearing apart beneath impossible pressure, mixed with the deep mechanical howl of collapsing reactor systems far below the excavation floor. Crimson energy surged through the remaining pylons in uncontrolled waves, while several overloaded conduits burst simultaneously across the chamber. Everything beneath the facility began dying at once. "Move," Harker ordered. No one hesitated. The team immediately withdrew from the reactor platforms, while structural collapse spread outward through the lower sectors. Emergency lighting failed across entire portions of the chamber, while secondary explosions erupted deeper inside the complex. Behind them, the Catachan Devil continued rampaging through the excavation levels. the enormous predator smashed through another collapsing platform, while fleeing Dark Mechanicum personnel scattered across the lower sectors. One corrupted engine seer disappeared beneath the creature's claws before being thrown directly into the unstable reactor pit. The beast barely noticed. The jungle was reclaiming the facility now, violently. Harker led the withdrawal toward the upper maintenance sectors, while Bren Harbor initiated timed overload cycling across the remaining reactor stabilizers through his portable detonator slate. "How long?" Sarah Cull shouted over the alarms. Harbor checked the collapsing reactor readings briefly. "Maybe 20 minutes before total detonation." Not enough. The extraction point remained nearly 14 kilometers east, beyond dense jungle terrain, and the facility itself was already falling apart around them. The first major collapse struck while the team crossed the upper transfer platforms. Several support braces snapped beneath thermal stress, dropping an entire catwalk section into the depths below. Flak barely cleared the collapsing edge before the platform vanished behind him into darkness filled with reactor fire. The shockwave nearly threw Sarah Cull from the adjacent walkway. Saul Alonius caught her instantly. "Keep moving." The Raptors maintained complete operational calm, despite the destruction surrounding them. Cyril Varrox continued monitoring rear sectors through controlled precision scans, while Alonius positioned himself repeatedly between the team and collapsing debris during withdrawal. They reached the upper maintenance corridors minutes later, only to discover conditions worsening further. The facility no longer belonged to the Dark Mechanicum. Catachan had entered completely. Large root systems had already burst through cracked tunnel walls along several sectors, while toxic fungal growth spread rapidly through ruptured coolant channels. Massive predatory insects swarmed through emergency lighting shafts attracted by heat and blood. More disturbing were the sounds deeper within the tunnels. Movement, large movement. Not one creature, multiple. The collapsing reactor had disrupted underground nesting systems beneath the jungle floor. Native predators now flooded toward the vibrations and heat throughout the damaged facility. The outpost had become prey, and everyone still inside it was trapped together. The team advanced through smoke-filled maintenance sectors, while reactor tremors intensified beneath every step. Enemy resistance barely remained organized now. Isolated groups of traitor guardsmen fled blindly through the corridors alongside panicked Dark Mechanicum personnel, attempting evacuation toward the surface. Several firefights erupted during the withdrawal. None lasted long. The enemy no longer fought to protect the facility. They fought to survive it. Near the upper cargo lifts, Rick von Strugger encountered a wounded, corrupted officer attempting to activate emergency lockdown controls beside a blast door terminal. The officer raised a sidearm weakly. Von Strugger shot him once through the chest and kept moving. No words exchanged. No hesitation. Further ahead, River identified a partially collapsed service tunnel, bypassing several blocked corridors leading toward the western perimeter breach. The alternative route reduced travel time considerably, but forced the team through unstable underground drainage sectors, partially flooded with contaminated runoff. They took it immediately. Time mattered more than comfort. The drainage tunnels descended sharply beneath the outer industrial sectors, while reactor overload warnings continued echoing behind them through damaged Vox systems. Water reached knee-height in several sections, black with oil and chemical residue leaking from ruptured machinery overhead. Visibility dropped badly. Only dim weapon lamps and emergency lumens illuminated the tunnels. Then the first body floated past. A dead Dark Mechanicum laborer, half-eaten. Something large had torn through the torso cavity completely. Nobody slowed down. The second body appeared moments later, tangled beneath exposed pipework. Then the third. By the fourth corpse, Flack quietly rotated the heavy bolter toward the darkness ahead. "We're not alone down here." The tunnel answered him. A low, predatory hiss echoed through the drainage sector ahead, followed by movement beneath the waterline. Fast movement. River immediately killed her weapon light. "Hold!" Everyone froze. The water rippled quietly around their legs, while distant reactor tremors shook the tunnel walls overhead. Then it emerged. A juvenile Catachan devil, roughly 4 meters long, climbed slowly across the drainage tunnel ceiling ahead, using hooked claws to anchor itself against the metal surface. Thick armored scales covered most of its body beneath layers of mud and blood. One of its forelimbs carried fresh burn wounds, likely caused during the reactor collapse, deeper underground. Its eyes reflected pale green beneath the darkness. The creature had followed fleeing personnel into the tunnels. Now it hunted. Nobody fired. Even wounded juveniles remained catastrophically dangerous inside confined spaces. The creature studied the group silently from above, while its tail moved slowly behind it through the darkness. Then another distant explosion rocked the facility. The reactor overload intensified again. The tunnel shook violently. The predator hissed once before retreating immediately back into the darkness behind it. Gone within seconds. Catachan creatures understood collapsing environments better than humans. That alone motivated the team to move faster. They finally reached the western perimeter breach nearly 11 minutes after leaving the reactor chamber. The facility above them was dying visibly now. Entire industrial towers collapsed inward beneath spreading explosions, while crimson reactor fire illuminated the jungle canopy overhead through heavy storm clouds. Thick smoke poured upward into the atmosphere, mixed with sparks, debris, and emergency distress signals still broadcasting blindly into the night. The outpost looked less like a fortress now, more like an infected wound being cauterized. Sarah Cull checked long-range Vox frequencies again, while the team regrouped briefly beneath the shattered support pylon near the swamp edge. "Extraction shuttles still inbound," she reported, "but signal integrity's degrading." "How long?" "Approximately 16 minutes. Too long, especially considering the reactor behind them had less than half that remaining before catastrophic failure. Harbour confirmed it moments later while checking reactor telemetry through the detonator slate. "We triggered deeper instability than expected," he warned. "The core's collapsing faster, meaning they would not outrun the blast wave if they remained near the basin." The team immediately pushed east through the jungle. Night conditions outside had worsened dramatically during the infiltration. Heavy rain mixed with ash and falling debris from the burning outpost behind them, while distant shockwaves rolled through the surrounding forest hard enough to shake entire tree lines. And now the jungle itself had awakened fully. Predator calls echoed across the darkness from multiple directions. Massive shapes moved beneath distant canopies. The destruction had triggered a feeding response. Catachan always noticed weakness. The route toward extraction became a brutal endurance march, through flooded terrain and unstable jungle sectors, while supplies dwindled rapidly. Flak carried barely 200 heavy bolter rounds remaining. Several weapon cooling systems already approached overheating thresholds after prolonged combat inside the facility. Sarah Cull's primary Vox relay failed entirely approximately 6 kilometers into the withdrawal. She switched immediately to the backup unit. River navigated continuously through difficult terrain, while avoiding newly active predator movement zones emerging across the jungle. Several sections of forest had already caught fire from falling reactor debris, creating enormous walls of steam where rain collided against burning vegetation. The reactor detonation behind them grew brighter with every passing minute. Then the ground shook hard enough to stagger everyone simultaneously. Not from the jungle, from the outpost. Harbour looked back once through the rain. The core's going. No one needed encouragement after that. The team increased pace despite exhaustion, while the jungle roared behind them beneath the light of a dying Dark Mechanicum fortress, collapsing into fire beneath the surface of Catachan. The extraction zone lay within a partially flooded clearing east of the Black Mire Basin, surrounded by enormous root formations and dense canopy coverage. Imperial survey teams had once used the location decades earlier during failed geological expeditions, before abandoning it after repeated predator attacks. Little remained now, except collapsed equipment frames, swallowed by vegetation and scattered rusted support pylons protruding through the mud. For veteran Catachans, it qualified as acceptable extraction terrain. Barely. The team reached the outer perimeter of the clearing approximately 4 minutes before reactor collapse. By then, exhaustion had begun affecting movement efficiency across even the most experienced members. Continuous combat, environmental exposure, and sustained withdrawal through hostile terrain had drained supplies and physical endurance harder than the infiltration itself. Rick von Strugger's damaged shoulder armor now hung partially detached beneath cracked restraint straps. Dried blood-coated portions of the underlayer around the hydraulic claw wound sustained earlier inside the facility. Bren Harbour carried only one unused demolition pack remaining, along with a nearly depleted power cell reserve for his detonator slate. Flak's ammunition reserves had reached critical levels. One partially filled drum remained attached beneath the heavy bolter feed assembly. Less than 100 rounds. Sarah Cull's backup Vox system emitted constant static bursts between fragmented extraction transmissions, while Cian Hale River continued scanning the jungle line for approaching movement beneath the storm. The raptors appeared largely unaffected physically. Mentally, however, even Saul Alonius had become more alert toward the surrounding jungle. That mattered. Astartes rarely displayed caution openly, unless circumstances justified it. The reactor shock waves intensified behind them. The jungle canopy periodically illuminated crimson through distant explosions erupting across the horizon, where the Dark Mechanicum outpost still collapsed inward beneath catastrophic overload. Entire sections of forest now burned beyond the basin despite heavy rainfall, casting shifting orange light through rising steam clouds above the trees. The facility was dying exactly as Bren Harbour predicted. Unfortunately, Catachan noticed. Predator activity surrounding the extraction zone had increased steadily during the team's approach. River identified at least 3 separate movement patterns circling beyond visual range through the surrounding vegetation. Large predators avoided the clearing itself for the moment, likely due to the approaching shuttle engines echoing faintly overhead through the storm. That hesitation would not last forever. Harker established a defensive perimeter immediately. Flack positioned himself near the northern route line, overlooking the most likely approach corridor through the jungle, while Sarah Cull attempted final confirmation with the inbound Valkyrie extraction pilot. Static overwhelmed most responses. Finally, a fragmented transmission emerged. 3 minutes, holding pattern impossible. Reactor wave interfering. Then silence again. Bren Harbor checked the horizon behind them uneasily. "We don't have 3 minutes." He was correct. The reactor collapse had progressed beyond controlled detonation. Entire sections of the southern horizon now glowed with unstable plasma fire beneath the storm clouds. Thick columns of burning debris continued rising into the atmosphere, while deep subterranean impacts rolled outward through the Earth itself. Something enormous detonated inside the basin moments later. The shockwave flattened portions of jungle canopy in the distance. Then came the sound. Not an explosion. A pressure wave. The dying reactor released its containment. A crimson pillar of energy erupted upward beyond the jungle horizon, piercing through the storm clouds high above southern Catachan. The light illuminated the entire region beneath blinding flashes, while every nearby tree bent violently outward beneath the expanding blast front. "Down," Harker ordered immediately. Everyone hit the mud seconds before the shockwave reached them. The impact rolled through the clearing like a physical wall. Mud and debris blasted across the extraction zone, while enormous tree branches snapped overhead and crashed into the jungle beyond. The pressure wave carried intense heat even from kilometers away. Flack barely maintained grip on the heavy bolter as the ground itself shook hard enough to fracture nearby root systems. Then darkness returned. The outpost was gone. Nothing remained visible beyond the burning horizon, except expanding firestorms spreading through the southern jungle. Sarah Cull slowly raised her head while checking the failing Vox unit beside her. "No secondary signals," she muttered, meaning no surviving facility transmissions, no enemy coordination, no reactor telemetry. The Dark Mechanicum presence beneath the basin had ceased entirely. A distant roar interrupted the silence moments later. Predators. Multiple. The explosion had triggered widespread panic and migration across surrounding territories. Movement erupted throughout the jungle beyond the clearing, while enormous shapes shifted between trees beneath the storm. The extraction shuttle still had not arrived. Harker looked toward the sky through heavy rainfall. Positions. Everyone immediately reset defensive coverage around the clearing. The next 2 minutes felt longer than the entire mission. Predatory movement circled constantly beyond visual range. Several times, River identified thermal signatures approaching through dense vegetation, before abruptly changing direction again. The jungle had become unstable after the reactor collapse. Fire, noise, shockwaves, and fleeing wildlife now pushed every nearby predator into overlapping territory conflicts. Then the first creature emerged. A spine moor burst from the western undergrowth near the edge of the clearing. The reptilian predator measured nearly 5 meters long, with layered armored plating running along its back beneath dripping rainwater. Its lower jaw opened sideways through multiple rows of hooked teeth, while sensory tendrils extended outward, searching through the air. Flak killed it instantly. The heavy bolter round tore the creature apart mid-charge, scattering armored fragments and blood across the mud. Unfortunately, the gunfire solved one problem while creating another. The jungle answered immediately. Movement erupted from every direction. Several smaller predators rushed the clearing simultaneously through the darkness, while distant roars echoed deeper within the forest. Sea and Hail River fired controlled long-last shots into the tree line, while von Strugger advanced toward the southern approach, firing Ripper shotgun blasts into fast-moving shapes, emerging through the roots. Saul Alonius stood directly in the center of the clearing, firing measured bolter bursts into the advancing jungle. The Astartes looked almost motionless compared to the chaos around him. Precise, controlled, lethal. One predator lunged toward Bren Harbor from the eastern brush before Cyril Varix removed most of its skull through a single suppressed bolt round. Then, finally, through the storm overhead, came the sound of Valkyrie engines. The extraction shuttle descended aggressively through the canopy moments later, with searchlights cutting across the clearing, while heavy bolter turrets mounted beneath the wings opened fire into surrounding jungle sectors automatically. The pilot wasted no time landing fully. The shuttle hovered barely 2 meters above the mud, while the rear deployment ramp lowered through pouring rain. "Move, move, move!" The team withdrew in formation toward the transport, while the jungle continued closing around the clearing. Predators avoided the Valkyrie's weapons fire for the moment, but remained visible beyond the searchlights circling the perimeter. Flak boarded last after unloading the remaining heavy bolter ammunition into the darkness behind them. The shuttle ascended immediately. The clearing vanished beneath the storm within seconds. Inside the troop compartment, nobody spoke initially. The mission exhaustion finally settled fully across the team once movement stopped. Armor plating dripped mud and blood onto the floor beneath dim red interior lights, while the engines roared overhead, carrying them northward away from the burning basin. Sarah Cull removed the damaged Vox headset from around her neck first. "It's gone," she said quietly. Nobody asked what she meant. Everyone understood. The Dark Mechanicum outpost no longer existed. Neither did whatever they had attempted to uncover beneath the jungle. John Harker finally looked toward the raptors across the compartment. Saul Alonius removed his helmet slowly for the first time since entering the reactor sectors. Sweat and grime covered his face beneath the dim lighting, while fresh scoring marks crossed portions of his armor from debris impacts sustained during the withdrawal. "You completed the objective," the Space Marine stated calmly. Simple words. No celebration. No ceremony. Just acknowledgement. That felt appropriate. The debriefing occurred approximately 11 hours later inside Fort Talassa, beneath maximum security clearance protocols. Medical personnel treated minor injuries, while Munitorum officials collected equipment reports and ammunition expenditures from the surviving team. No fatalities. No missing personnel. Against all probability, every member returned alive. Colonel Basha reviewed the mission records personally within the same underground chamber where the operation originally began. Holographic projections displayed the aftermath across southern Catachan in fragmented orbital scans. The basin no longer existed. The reactor collapse had annihilated the excavation complex entirely beneath several kilometers of collapsed terrain and plasma fire Large portions of the surrounding jungle still burned despite constant rainfall. More importantly, no remaining signs of Dark Mechanicum activity survived within the region. Containment successful. Temporarily. Cian Hale River provided the final environmental assessment near the end of the debriefing. "The jungle's already reclaiming the site," she said. Orbital imagery confirmed it. Even after total reactor collapse, vegetation growth had already begun spreading back across the ruined basin. Massive root systems expanded inward toward the crater edges, while native predator migration patterns returned rapidly toward the region. Catachan was healing itself, violently. Colonel Basha listened quietly before finally shutting down the tactical projection systems around the chamber. Then the planet handled the rest. No one argued, because in the end, the Imperium had not truly destroyed the Dark Mechanicum outpost. Catachan had.